What a fool, what a fool. Yes, because you're impertinent collector. It for him wasn't enough to test positive for COVID right at the beginning of the Christmas festivities. And so I have to abandon all celebratory invitation when I could have tasted the exotics of my Chinese and Vietnamese friends, whilst at the same time prove my culinary skills, bringing some Western dishes, knowing too well that both groups, myself and all the other Asians, are locked in our cultural mental prison. When I think that Western food is superior, and they think nothing beat Vietnamese and Chinese food in general. But I was a fool because I thought that for once I could avoid the Christmas drama that always engulfed my family. And how could I expect to be part of it whilst I was by myself in Sydney drinking tea and the postman leftovers? Well, it happened because on the 26th, my sister has sent me some picture of the Christmas she had with my mum. And in this family portrait of happiness and genetic accomplishments, you had, of course, my mum, my sister, her two children, my niece and nephew, and my brother-in-law, who is always invited for the photograph and for the lunch, I have to say, despite the fact that my sister cast him away many years ago. But that was the picture. And so, apart from the Christmas, Merry Christmas that we had on Christmas Eve when my mom was having dinner with my sister, and the quick Christmas, Merry Christmas that we had on the day of Christmas with a quick phone call when everybody looked good, but I looked with a bit of beard and a little bit like on the way down. But the following day, my mom asked, who do you think looked the best in the photograph? That was the trap that was deserving of a Walt Disney's revival, with the old mother asking the mirror who is the best one of the whole realm. And me, being myself, I thought I could add a touch of innocence, claiming that my sister really looked great. My mom didn't like it. And so the same question was asked again. Yes, apart from your sister, who else looked the best? And then I say well, Mom, of all of them, my sister, even if she's always being photogenic, she really look nice and fresh and happy, despite the fact that she's always have a lot on her mind. What about me? I said, Mama, please, you're 85 years old. Of course you look good. But somehow, my nephew was unaware that he had poisoned my consciousness with a photograph that he took at the end of the lunch that somehow had captured quite an ironic and epic image of my mom lighting herself a cigarette on a candle that was part of the table. And so I said to my Mom, you looked like the ultimate card reader from one of these gypsy circus that would travel Europe in the 1920s. Oh, what did I say? And that, of course, triggered around the phone calls with my sister, because she said to my sister, how could I be so insensitive? And my sister called me and she said, like, how could you tell something like that to your mother, knowing that she will be on my back immediately, and now this and now that. But I thought that the whole thing was quite hilarious. And the reality is, and I said to her when I realized that she was hungry, I said, like, Mom, the reality is, at your age, you don't have time to be upset. At my age, I don't have the time to feel guilty. And so let's try to be happy in the conviction that each one of us is right and everybody else is wrong. And that is the end of the phone call. And it's true that this is the end of the year and we don't have much time left. And today, what we have to do is to climb. Yes, climb, 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 and afterwards roll down. Because today, Davide here, the Impertinent Collectors. Don't forget to like and write me a comment and subscribe. Takes you climbing Mount Olympus. Yes, till we reach the plateau where our wonderful Greek god used to reside. Not always in happiness, but in a jovial communion where everything went. If it was for me, we should have never let them go. They're wonderful. Among the gods, the king, the supremo, the gods of the gods, of course, is Zeus. But even Zeus, from time to time, get bored. And in one of these occasions, where Zeus got bored, he got his eye were captured by the beauty of another young goddess. And this goddess was a special one. Yes, because she was the daughter of Uranus and Gaia. And Uranus was the god of heaven. And Gaia was the goddess of earth. And her name was Mnemosyne. And so Zeus took her to the sky and made love with her for 9 days. Every day it was a bang. And at the end of it, Mnemosyne gave birth to 9 beautiful daughters. And these daughters that had as father the god of the gods, and as mother, who was the goddess of memory, Mnemosyne, and whose grandparents were no other than heaven and earth, were the Muses. These 9 Muses are what provided inspiration for the artists of around the world ever since. Comedy, tragedy, poetry, history, and among them, which other form, if not music? Yeah, because if you think about it, the two artistic expressions that really required no understanding of the cultural context in which they've been created, and this was true back then at the beginning of time, and is true certainly now, were painting and music. And we are all familiar with the hand printed on the top of this cave somewhere in Spain. Probably the first artistic expression that we know and we recognize. Extraordinary, thousands and thousands of years ago, somebody marked his hand, and there is this red sort of background and his hand sticking out. Extraordinary. But we can only imagine what must be like to hear somebody singing for the first time. Yes, you had the melody coming for the most precious instrument that nature, the gods, and the Muses have given to mankind. And from there, the instruments were created. The flute first, and then a string instrument called the lyre, mainly free string on a wooden frame. And those strings, blum, 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 were enough to produce a melody. And that melody might have been the background for stories that were told. And that might have inspired imagery that were then captured in more and more elaborate forms. But at the beginning, for music to take shape, for that melody, nothing was really needed. And so it is true, back then in the prehistory, that even if they could not articulate very complex thoughts, and it was more really like beastie sounds as a way to communicate, like when one of the members is displeased. I wouldn't say my mom has been treating me like that, but you know what I mean. You know when somebody is upset. It's the sound more than the meaning of the words. And so the music was there to soothe, to create these emotions that each one of us could interiorize and translate in whatever images we could relate to, in the past, in the future, but also in a future that it might never exist, our own fantasy thought. But is it not this fantastic, incredible, extraordinary, all this? And so, all this to say that when I was traveling with my mom, we are now talking about 35 years ago, in the south of France, every other month, and they still do it these days, there is an antique market that is open on the first day for dealers only. They open at 6 a.m. in the ancient city of Avignon. Back in the days was within the city walls, but then it grew so big that they moved it in a fair space a few kilometers away from Avignon. But the day prior to the exhibition in Avignon, the antique markets, all sorts of small villages create their own little markets, because they know that buyers are coming from all over Europe, in many cases from all over the world. And so they can fly to Paris, they can drive from London, they can drive from Italy, they can fly into Nice. If they come from the States, they rent a car, they rent a van, and they'll go. And in one of these desks, under the supervision of my mom, I found an object that captured my imagination, and is an object that I kept with me ever since, and that I took with me in London, in Dubai, in Taipei, and that I still have here in Sydney. And it is true that in a life that I lived full of wonders, I only have one regret, And the only regret that I have is being my inability to play a classical instrument. Even if my family has always been a very musical family, my mom could play the piano, you know, even if I make jokes of her with my dad, you know, we always trivialize whenever she tried, you know, to do something with music. You know, my grandmom, my grandmother played the piano. They were all extremely musical. I had an uncle who had a fantastic international career as an opera singer. I'll tell you about him, you know, probably in another episode. But I was given the opportunity to learn piano when I was a kid. But I was placed into the care of a dreadful woman who, in all fairness, back then when I was like 8-9 years old, the way they play music is very, very different from the way they teach music now to kids. I mean, some of these kids are already incredibly talented, and that wasn't my call. But I've always enjoyed music, but I couldn't take the discipline. And you know, we'll have to do scales and scales and scales and scales for hours and hours and hours. I had enough of this dreadful teacher who was a teacher at the conservatorium. And I remember that one day in winter was a rainy day and it was cold and the bus didn't arrive and I got at her place and I was all wet, all cold, and she didn't even offer me a glass of water. I have to quickly dry myself and sit on the piano. And as I place my hands on the piano, she noticed that I had dirty fingernails, long and dirty. And she said, "That's it. I will not allow those dirty hands to touch the keyboard of my beautiful piano." And I look at her and I say like, "Andy, I will not allow a brute like you to teach me music ever again." And so I left. By the time I left, she had called my mom, and my mom says like, oh, you shame me, you know, with your dirty hands. I say like, irrelevant. I will no longer learn how to play the piano. A monumental decision that I now regret. But so, in those banks, in this tiny little village that is split by a little river, and this village is called Il-sur-la-Sorge, I find an object, and this object spoke to me the way object speaks to the collector. And you see, this is a musical baton, but is a gift that an unknown little orchestra somewhere in rural France gave as a gift to the conductor of the little orchestra. And there is the dedication here, and it's called La Lyre Fraternelle. Oh, this concept that music bond us all together and make us brothers. It make us siblings, no matter what. And so I thought about the artisan who created this object, carving the silver on this rose wood. I thought about the orchestra when they get to design, when they get to see it, the moment where the conductor received this. And who knows what the story of this man, but for sure is somebody that he learned not one instrument, but many instruments to be able to be the conductor of a small orchestra. And then all the members of the orchestra, the one who came, the one who stayed, the one who left, who all have to learn their own score for their own instruments. How many hours of patience and frustration. And also think about the public that got to listen to them. Maybe at the turn of the century, 1910, 1900, 1880, this is what the period when this one was created. And it takes us back to this age of innocence, before World War I, when Europe have seen the wars evolving from like a context of honor to slightly bigger armies like the one that were formed during the Napoleonic Wars. But it was still somehow a display of values, and there were still rules, there was still a sense of a line that you wouldn't want to cross. That line was unfortunately crossed with World War I. That's where the innocence has been lost. And the events that unfolded after World War I, took down the royal family in Russia of the Tsar. And that create havoc across Europe. And within Europe, you have the birth of fascism under Mussolini and Nazis under Hitler. And then we had World War II, and then we have the Holocaust, where so many incredible musicians have been lost. But back then, in the 19th century, 1910, 1911, 1902, there was still a world where people were trying to dress up to go to a little concert, and where to be a conductor was meaningful, but not as meaningful like it is now when you have the big personalities. It was like an act of love, and it was somehow a profession that never paid big money and required extraordinary sacrifices that me, myself, was not prepared to take when I had to learn the piano. But I'm the one who I was fortunate enough to attend to the most wonderful concert around the world. And apart from the top concert in the top venues, we had the good fortune of having small concert with international artists held at home in our home. And that was like extraordinary. And so as the years come to an end for 2024, what I wish for you is music. Yes, it doesn't matter how frustrated you are, listen to some music. Because as Friedrich Nietzsche said, life without music is a mistake. And if you happen to find yourself listening to the perfect tune at the radio, rather than being in a concert hall listening to somebody's famous, remember what George Bernard Shaw once said: hell is full of amateur musicians. Oh, let's enjoy the professional when the moment is right. And finally, since this is a French object, for a French conductor from a French little orchestra that we will never know who they were. I leave you with a quote from Ravel, who said, "Throughout my life, I only had one love affair, music. And this is me, the impertinent